Hi, welcome to Blood and Dice. We're here to help you enjoy all aspects of role-playing, whether as a player or a DM. And in this episode, we're actually going to be going through DMing for beginners. So that's helping you organise a game, going through some of the common obstacles facing a new DM, and making sure that everybody has fun doing it.
And this week, I am joined by my good friend Dan Plant, who I've known for absolutely years. Dan, say hello.
Hello.
And of course, you were the first person that I played an RP with.
Yeah, it's awesome. It was a good game.
Yeah, I can't remember exactly what year it was. Was it?
Oh,
I had a feeling it was like 98.
No.
I think it might have been later
Let's
than
hope it wasn't that long ago.
that.
But possibly. Long. Anyway, go to plan. It was fine.
Was it a one-shot or was it I know it was partially homebrewed, but I don't know whether it was actually based off of D&D or something else.
It was based on Steve Jackson, Ian Livingstone, sort of second series of game books when they did sort of a multiplayer type scenario. So
the old turn to page 35 to pick up the sword and this sort of thing.
Exactly. I think which is where a lot of us started from. It's where a lot of us developed a passion from, either that or D&D or a combination of between. But me and a couple of friends rolling some dice. So it was part of that. Partly I'd mashed in some of the Critical Roles tables that I really loved from an old Lord of the Rings.
I remember you being obsessed for a while with random tables. It is a good thing to have as part of your repertoire as a DM. It's just sort of the access to these random tables. There's loads of them online. They're all over the place. So let's say if you're doing like a wild magic, there's a wild magic table in the player's handbook in D&D 5e. I was going to say you could kind of, if you wanted to, pretty much do an entire game based on those random tables.
There are plenty of GM-less type RPs out there, either that you will use mostly tables and things, and they've been around for a long time. I'm yet to have a go myself with a couple of them, but I have got a couple in my collection of things that I did want to try particularly. Most of it is tables and things. You just roll for what happens. Some of them have got various different scenario pages that you turn to. What's the Cthulhu game that you play multiplayered?
The most known one is called Cthulhu.
That's the one, and it'll go on forever potentially. But again, it happens as it happens, mostly with sort of randomish roll things depending on how it happens.
There's a book I've got that a friend bought me called The Dice Man by Luke Reinhardt, and it's actually a novel about kind of like a Fight Club type book. The guy is just fed up with his life, but rather than going like making soap and blowing up buildings, he basically just, when it comes to a decision, he rolls the dice. No matter what it is, he just like roll the dice, see what happens. And like I say, in a way,
Time Durden goes D&D.
Yeah, kind of. Actually, if I rack my brains, I haven't watched it in a long time, but I think there was an episode of Luther. I'm sure there was an episode of that where the bad guy was rolling dice to decide whether he would attack people or something. It's quite an old, early series episode, but the point is, dice rolls, dice tables are useful. They're a really useful thing to have as a tool and a reference, especially if it's regarding something specifically. I would say that you don't have a lot of confidence in. If you're an expert on, say, let's say herbology, because quite often I've had some players say, I want to try making a potion. They'll say, I looked through the forest. What plants do I find? I don't know what kind of plants grow in some random forest. So normally I'll say, I don't know, some nettles. It's really helpful to have like a table like that so that you can say, okay, right, so the likelihood of them finding deadly nightshade or foxglove or something like this, something that would grow in that specific type of forest, like a deciduous forest or a jungle or something like this, is really handy when you don't have that expertise.
Exactly. As an alternative, throw it back on the players. What are you looking for? And then think of a sensible target for them to have and roll for it. They either find it or they don't.
I would say this is always a good idea as a DM. If a player asks you to do something, ask them why they want to do it. If it's something that they want to do privately away from the other players, then just sort of have a sidebar or get them to pass you a note or something, whatever you want to do. But it's nothing worse when you're DMing than the player going, I want to do this thing. Okay, fine. And then they go, I've made a... Have you heard of the peasant railgun?
No, I haven't.
It's a thing in D&D. It's a well-known thing where it's sort of a rules exploitation where because D&D, you can get passing something to someone if you're stood next to them is instantaneous. If you can get like a village of people or something lined up in a row and you give them like an iron rod, you can essentially build around injuries and things like this. So I play D&D quite light and comedic. If it was in a more serious game like Call of Cthulhu or I would probably say, I don't think you'd be able to do that. But obviously not to the point where the players aren't having fun. And that is one of the main things with DMing. Like, you want everybody to have fun.
Exactly.
You know, you're doing this for the players, but also you don't want to have a chore as a DM because you're not going to want to do it again otherwise. There's all sorts of crazy things you can do if you know the rules inside out. As many systems as I've played, and I know the rules for quite a lot of systems, and I can't cram all those rules into my brain. For quite a lot of the systems, I don't necessarily try and remember every single nuance of every rule. And
people are scared of trying to run a game and expecting they're going to have to be able to build a world from scratch based entirely on the rulebook to the number.
Yeah. As you said, some people may think that DMing, there's a meme. The players are like, oh yeah, I bet you've got this whole world scripted out, every single person and every tavern and everything. And the DM goes, yes. And behind the screen, there's a little note on his DM screen saying, goblin with a funny voice. And that's it. A lot of the time you are working on the fly. That might scare some people. If you've got a situation...
I see it a little bit like when you're watching a film and there's something that's about to happen, and then instantly you can think of at least 3 things that might be behind the door. It might be a surprise. It might be nothing. And that's the thing as a GM. You can decide yourself at that point. You can change your mind until you've actually told the players what's happening.
Especially games like D&D where you've got mimics and magic. You could have them open the door and say, you open the door and in front of you is a bottomless pit. And they're like, what? But earlier we walked through that door. Like, oh, well, magic, isn't it? And yes, for something like that, you want to have a pretty good reason for why the door that they've been through is now opening to somewhere else. Maybe it's a magic door. Maybe it's an illusion. Maybe the pit isn't actually there. As I mentioned earlier, I had various players who know the rules a bit too well. I had a player...
Always be prepared. There's always one. Always one.
Who said, okay, I'm doing a monk. I said, fine, that's great. He said, I'm wondering if I could get a feat, but I'm happy to give him a disability, or a minus to go with this plus. I said, go on, what do you want? And we'll see. And he said, well, how about if I make my monk physically blind, but he's got true sight? And I was like, true sight? Looked it up quickly. Oh, that's quite good. Okay, yeah. And I said, you can have true sight, but I'll limit it to 30 feet. And he was like, okay, right. And it was the most game-breaking thing I could have given him. He could see through any illusion. As long as it was within 30 feet, he could see through walls, almost. I regret allowing him to do that. But that was quite early on in my DMing career, as it were. And there's all sorts of things like that players will try and suggest to you. Yes. And the only way you can really do it is to either speak to other DMs, like maybe on a forum or something, or just experience. Because even with something like that, if a player's got a game-breaking character or a magic weapon that is too powerful or something, there are ways around it. Say they've got a magic weapon that you allowed them to start the game with, and it's a bit too powerful. You could say that it's actually an heirloom from a line of powerful wizards, and the wizard hears about it being used, and he comes to try and get it back from the player. Not necessarily sort of have a fight with him, but maybe give him some money for it, or what have you. There's all sorts of ways around these sort of things.
Have a power that suddenly goes on the fritz because of something you've decided has happened. Have them cursed by a witch. There are ways to take these things away.
Yeah, this is a really good idea as well for things like if your players are claiming that they're good and they're following a particular god. They say, oh yeah, I get my powers from the good dragon god, Bahamut. You say, okay, you're being a bit killy. Shield of Faith or something like that is not quite as strong as it was previously. Your god is kind of poking you to say, keep an eye on what you should be doing.
Yeah, we might talk a bit about being a bit killy later, Dan. I might have a few anecdotes.
There are other things that players will want to try and do. If you said you were going to be playing a game based on Dark Heresy or something, set in the Grimdark universe, the players might decide that they want to be a bit sort of darker with things, because obviously there's things like torture if you want information from an enemy or something. If your players sort of start going down a particular route and they're saying like, I want to burn the children alive or something, and there's a line, and sometimes you've got to check with the other players how far down that line they want to go, because you don't want to traumatize your players and you don't want them traumatizing you. So, like I say, if you're going to play a proper dark, gritty game, it might be worth saying in session 0, okay, there might be triggers in this game for people, you know, if they've got issues with certain things, just let me know and I'll avoid them. One of the games I'm doing at the moment, which you know about, Dan, is the murder roleplay that is been put on sort of hiatus during the lockdown for now. When I was coming up with it and theorizing how I wanted it to work and whatever, I did say to everybody, okay, it's based in the real world. Do you want me to avoid no way around using the R word or anything like that, and just have it as violent or blah, blah, blah? Yeah, I don't want to go into any sort of sexual areas where you guys might feel uncomfortable. And they said, no, just leave that. Just do it as a serial killer. And it was like, okay, cool. And then I just developed it from there, because I was doing a lot of research for this thing. And to be honest, I think as a DM, be careful what you're researching, because I've got so much research on how bodies decay and stuff like this. So
honestly, Gov, it's for a game.
It's for roleplay, Your Honour. If you're going to do anything like that, you want to set the boundaries early so that you don't surprise people.
And it's about finding a good, great story that you think you are going to be interested in, your players are going to be excited about and want to be engaged in. It's finding something in a topic that you quite like. If you've got a group of friends and they all are very interested in sci-fi, you're probably not going to be doing a medieval romance. They're probably not going to get excited about it. Do with what your players want to be doing and something you really are interested and want to explore. Allow them to be their own heroes.
That is one of those lines. Is that from one of the books, actually? That's what it certainly sounds like a tagline.
I've read a lot of them, Dan. It all sort of starts to come out eventually.
I mentioned previously session 0, which is always really handy for starting a new game.
Never underestimate how long it takes just to get people happy with the character. You will easily, if you've even got a group of 3, maybe even 2 players, you can still spend 5 hours sorting out a character that everyone's happy with that fits in with the rules. Yeah. Allow them plenty of time to get used to how things might work and what kind of person they want to be, and help them build a good, exciting character they want to play with. It doesn't have to be done there and then. A lot of that can be prepped if you've got, over Messenger or on the phone and stuff to talk it all through. But it allow plenty of time. Don't think people are going to knock together a character in the first 10 minutes, unless you've got pre-prepared characters and you've already selected the character for them. But that will take a lot of the fun away from building a character. Anyone who's played any decent sort of computer-based RPG. I mean, have you played any of Fallout, Dan?
Yeah, of course I have. Yeah.
I haven't built your character's face.
Yeah.
The face that you hardly ever see in the game, but I reckon I spent 2 hours building a character, which is ridiculous, completely pointless, but people love doing it, so let them do it.
Given as well that Fallout 4 there's no consequence on how you make your player look. It's not like they will react to a player with a massive nose and green hair. Makes absolutely no difference. Yeah, I totally get what you mean with the character creators, especially if you're playing a game that you know is going to be what's like a splatterpunk game, Richard mentioned last episode, where you're expecting your players to get killed.
And it was still good gameplay, even though effectively we moved from one train cart to a different one.
That is a good point as well. You mentioned there is that it's still gameplay, coming up with characters and their plots and their motivation, which was the theme of the last episode, was creating characters and whatever. That is still part of the game. If you've known your group for a long time and you're all good friends, it can be just as much fun coming up with these characters as it is playing the game.
Absolutely. Sometimes you can help them to build a better, more dynamic group, and sometimes you just have to let them roll with it, and they will come up with the most obscene, ridiculous, insane characters.
Yeah.
Again, as a great example with the first superhero game that I did, and one of the characters decided they would have absolutely no powers at all. A powerless superhero.
Nate.
Who had no self-confidence, who only wanted to be just very, very lucky. Now that was it had 2 or 3 moments of some of the best gameplay I've ever had. Just the most ridiculous character. He subdued an armed guard for about 4 rounds, and he just wasn't able to get back up again. It was just ridiculous. He just ran at an armed guard, shirtless, screaming, and avoided all of the gunfire. It was amazing.
Did you ever read Guards by Terry Pratchett?
I did. Yes, I did. Exactly that.
There's a bit where they have to try and shoot a dragon.
It's the 1 in a million shot.
It's not quite 1 in a million. I'd say it's 1 in 9,462. Oh, hold on. Let me stand on one leg.
And it was exactly that point. It works really, really well. So allow players to sometimes run the slightly ridiculous if it's going to be funny. Make it work. On that, again, I think important to work out that people may or may not have that much time, or they may not be overly invested how long you want the game to run for, because it will often run much longer than you expect. I'd say it's better almost to finish early and then have a chance to sort of talk about what happened, rather than run sort of only partway through and then run out of time and it never finishes.
If it is going to be something that you're running as a campaign or a say a 3-shot, something like this, sometimes it's quite important to take notes for these things as well. And it's always better to take those notes at the end of straight after the session is finished, rather than try and do it later on and think, oh wait, where did they go to? How much did they spend in that tavern and blah blah blah.
What information did they actually get hold of?
Exactly.
So you don't give them something that you weren't supposed to understand yet.
And sometimes working these things in as props as well. With the murder thing, the game that I'm running, I actually got hold of a massive whiteboard for the players so that they could stick things up and do notes on the whiteboard. So I've actually got their notes in my front room on a whiteboard. And
amazing.
When I come to doing things in the next session, I can just go, right, okay, what did they do last session?
A good bit of props add enormous amounts of tactile realism. If a player can physically touch an object, it's far more engaging in gameplay. And even super silly stuff like we were talking about with having sort of branded drinks and things.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not expecting people to have fully functioning glowing LED magic swords or anything like this, but if you're good at electronics and you've got the time, that would be great. But yeah, all the little things you can do. Say to your players, you open the chest and you find this, and you hand them something.
Print off scrolls and things. You can write magic runes for them to hold. Give them a key. A big old brass key. Everyone loves a big old brass key.
Yeah. Or even if it's just a scrap of paper with a hastily drawn note. You search the entire room. All you find is this scrappy bit of paper, and it's just a torn off bit of paper. And you've written a couple of sentences, and you've torn it in such a way that you haven't got the entire paragraph, and they've got to try and figure out what the other words are, the words that are missing. And it's stuff like that will really get them engaged and go, oh, wait, oh, hold on. What's that word? It looks like the. Okay, right, the passage. It gets them focused on this hook. And while they're doing that as well, these little things, there's so much information that they need to find out. It's impossible to have all the prep that you need, because it's guaranteed that your player is going to go, we spoke to that tradesman, the guy with the weapon stall. They'll bring up something completely random. Like, didn't they mention that their father was a blacksmith? Is this the blacksmith in the other town with the missing hand? And sometimes they'll bring up something like that, and you go, yes, it is. Yes, that is actually their father. And you can work in these like little subplots.
Yes. Wow, that's really clever how you managed to build that into this. Yes, I am very clever. I recently played a game on Discord with a group of friends, and the whole scenario effectively of the game basis is half of the players are ghosts and can only communicate through message or through picture or sound files. They're not allowed to speak.
Mm.
And the investigators are not allowed to type. They're only allowed to talk.
Okay.
Right?
There's a board game that's very similar to that. You've got some mediums that are trying to figure out, I think they're trying to figure out a murder. And the ghost, who is one of the other players, can only send dreamlike pictures. And they've got to try and figure out from the pictures whether the colour is related to something specific. I think it's called Mysterium. I'll put a link in the comments at the end. It's a really good game. But yeah, very similar to that, where the players are not given direct information. They're sort of given images or sort of allegories where they've got to figure something out is related.
Well, the nice thing I liked about this particular one we were playing was that I don't think it's a completely finished idea of a game anyway. There were some basic instructions of how to put the game together and how to play it. The investigators had to decide on having specific fears, and if the ghosts started to describe something like a fire, for example, they would react to that appropriately, and that the other ghosts themselves could then maybe play on that. It was mostly for fun, because the idea is that ghosts are trying to get across to explain how they died and in order to be set free, get their unfinished business done.
Yeah.
Now, the interesting thing about that is there was no explanation of how that was going to happen or what would actually set the ghosts free or what that even meant or any other story that would possibly link any of the ghosts together.
Okay.
Right.
Who was DMing this? Were you DMing this?
There is no DM. This is the thing. There are only ghosts and they're investigators. There's no actual storyline.
Right.
So what that meant was, once we'd started playing and the ghost had started messing around and sending little things and trying to leave frightening messages and visualizations about what was happening in each of the rooms and trying to give them information, we couldn't communicate with each other to explain what we were trying to do. All of the ghosts are just called Ghost. So the investigators didn't know which ghost they were speaking to or if any of the things were related at all. And of course, as the ghosts, we had no idea either what the other ghosts were trying to do, if anything. So it just became very convoluted. Now, the exciting and interesting thing about this is each of us had our own idea of what we were trying to do as a ghost, but the investigators had no idea that they weren't in any way related and were drawing conclusions about what they thought. And they built an entire backstory about a mass serial killer. And as the ghosts, we were just leading them on and building this backstory with them. And once it was finished, they wanted some explanation of what they'd done. And we had no idea. We had no idea what it was going on about. And it was a really good, fun game. They had an idea there was this massive, incredible backstory that they were uncovering, not realizing that they were building it as they were going along. It worked much better, I think, than it was supposed to happen. It was good fun. It was a good evening. But again, it doesn't matter if what the players are doing is actually the direction you wanted them to go in. If that wasn't part of your story and it sounds good, steal it, build it in.
Yeah. One of the things that can really sort of kill a game in terms, if you're a player, is feeling as though you're being what it tends to be called railroading, where
allowed to get into it. And it's quite frustrating as a player. So if you are being a DM of that, it's important to try not to do that too much to the players. If it sounds like it would make sense, then unless you can think of a sensible way to move them, steer them away from it, you have to let them do it. If you've got a locked door in a wooden shack and they realize that one of the players is perfectly capable of smashing through the wall and they're going to try doing it, it isn't more fun to say the wooden wall is too strong for you to break. It's more fun to let them smash through that wall and then you're going to have to wing the rest of it. Have extra guards called to try and tie them back up again.
Or if there is some specific reason that you don't want them to do that, then you've got to give them a reason for it. Maybe they start to smash through the wall, but the noise alerts guards. It's all about ultimately the whole fun of RP is that you've got that freedom there to do pretty much anything you want to do. So bear that in mind when you are DMing, that the players, sometimes they'll want to do something that they'll definitely do something that you didn't expect to do. I say that with a degree of cynicism because 99% of the time the players will make a different decision than you expect them to make. But that doesn't mean to say that you should deny them. You should, maybe you can let them go down the path that they want to go down for a little bit and then steer them back onto the path that you want them.
Lead them and eventually just start to give them less.
Exactly. It's perfectly valid to have a narrative dead end as well. Doesn't always mean if they hear something in a pub, it is sometimes quite fun just for it to be a rumour. They'll overhear someone saying, I heard there was treasure in the mine on the east side of town. And they head over to this mine and they search and search and search. There's no treasure there, but whilst they're in that area, you could have them find out something else.
And hook them in with something different.
You could have all the design for a really elaborate story laid out, and you can bet your boots that the players, 3/4 of that information is never going to be found out.
Yes, important to accept. Everyone who's played a game of any kind will not understand how much effort has been put into all of the little side paths and the sub-quests.
I had Red Dead 2. I got through a whole year. I got to the epilogue. I've still not finished it because that game is so, there's so much little details. There's little shacks that in the swamp in Lemoyne that you discover, and they've got stories in there. There's a shack you find that's got paintings in it, and you look around, it's like, oh, wow, this is cool. And you come back later in the game and there's progress has been made on these paintings, and you're like, that is amazing. You know, and I'm one of those people who likes to, I think they're called completionists, where you like to try and see everything that is in a game.
Yes.
Not everyone is like that.
Spider-Man, and I'm still, as subquests and side things come up and unlockables, and I'm aiming to finish those bits before I'm realistically moving on much with the quest, because I like to have a full set of things. I like to not leave little bits that aren't completed.
It's worth knowing what your players are like. If they are going to be people that are either going to want to stick to the main quest and nothing but the quest, laser focused, or if they're like kittens with ADHD and they're going to be like, let's go over here, let's look at that. What's that? Oh.
When your players go into a room and they want to search the cupboards, so they search the cupboards, but there's nothing there. But then they want to search under the windowsills, and then they want to search the floor, then they want to search the ceiling, and then they want to search the fireplace. Like, there's nothing in the room.
There is sometimes a danger of players getting a long time searching in this room. There's nothing here. It's perfectly valid just to tell them there is nothing here.
Another way I like to do as well, as we talked about before, is just the cutscene.
Yes.
When you get to a point where it's perfectly acceptable to completely take over the narrative, as the GM, you have absolute control and absolute power. And that's not just over the story in general, that's over the players themselves. If a player starts to do something that you feel isn't appropriate to them, or they're going in the wrong way, just tell them what their player does. They have no control over that. Sometimes it's just worth doing. You try to do this thing. However, the guard starts coming towards you, and being a nervous player, he's not really happy with that. The guard is looking quite frightening, so you decide it's not an appropriate time to fight, and you sneak back into the shadows. They didn't decide to do that. They decided to do it for them.
If it's something minor like that, I would say wholeheartedly, that's fine. Obviously, bear in mind that you don't want to take away too much agency from your players in that thing. So sometimes it is worth doing, is if you're doing a longer cutscene, like say for example, I've done
traveling to a new city.
I've done a dream sequence before. Basically, they were all captured and they were given a drug by the antagonist. And when they took this drug, they all fell unconscious. And I gave each of the players a specific dream sequence that was relevant to them, and I laced the dream sequence with clues. An eagle is flying alongside you, and the eagle looks at you and it says, "Father." And then, as you look, the eagle disappears and you fall into the ocean. They're all sort of metaphors, obviously. It's for them to figure out, but they're all very specific to the player. And of course, I was in full control during this. And I took them off individually from the group to tell them their story. And it was great when they all came back together and they all started, and I said, you wake up in the cell. And that is at this point where they all said, did you have a funny dream? I had a funny dream. And they started talking amongst themselves about the dream. And it was really good watching them try and figure out what their dream was about. And they were saying, I had an eagle that turned to me and said, Father. What is that all about? And like another player might say, you remember that time when we were in Eagleswood and there was the guy and you thought you knew him? Could that be your long lost father? It's really interesting for them to sort of pick up on things themselves. It's sometimes you might need to give them a nudge in a certain way, especially something as esoteric as a dream sequence. Oh, remember that time? Or
right balance between a puzzle that is difficult enough to be a challenge, but without being too complex.
Yeah.
But if you can get it just right, it's the look on their faces as they go, ah!
Yeah. Sometimes
you
they're
already
completely wrong as well. Like,
okay, there is that.
I know what it is. It's that thing. Sometimes it is funny just to let them have the wrong idea and maybe spend 10 minutes sort of with the wrong idea in mind before you go, actually, you know what? You're probably looking at this the wrong way around. Yeah, so we've mentioned about improvisation and preparation. What sort of preparation would you do maybe for a session 0? Obviously, there's things like map making. That's a really obvious one. One of the things I've done before that I found quite helpful for myself, not for the players, obviously, but just as a reference for myself, is to do like a flow chart. So you've got the main storyline in front of you, 2 or 3 different ways that the players could go, and maybe do branches in this flow chart to sort of show what might happen. You're not going to be able to do every single branching option. And as we've mentioned, the players are definitely going to do something that you're not going to foresee. But something like that I find is sometimes quite helpful for figuring things out, or something that is visual that you can just look at quickly and go, oh, right, so they've done this. They decided to do that.
Quite well, if it's going to be... Again, it depends on how you want to run as well, or how the game system is, I suppose, that you're running. If you are, and it's probably quite a nice idea as an introductory DM, it would be to have something set fairly well in an order with not too many parts to it, so you can just follow along one bit to another. I mean, that's fine, but as you become more competent and you gain confidence, maybe depending on how they finish one particular part will affect how something else is going to happen. Gaining extra allies maybe for a battle, or leading them and they decide to go down through the tunnels to get into the city versus sneakily over the walls, for example. You might have different scenes that will play out based on those things. But if you are wanting to do something a little bit more open world, you've got a few different hooks of different subquests and things they might want to do, and you're going to let them just go wherever and do however. It's really important to have it all very clearly listed in an order of what you think will happen one after another. I'd have either a clipboard with various different pages of set sort of sub-scenes, like if you go into a dungeon.
I definitely have scenes marked down for specific, almost cut scenes. You remember when you triggered something in Half-Life and something would happen? And that was one of the very early games to do that. It's good to have that written down because it doesn't matter how they get to it, but then when they get to that point, you can go, this is what happens. You hear the beating of a heavy leathery wing, and above the castle ground appears the 7 heads of the Hydra and or whatever it is. If you've got it written down as well, it's a lot easier to put in that depth of description and what have you, rather than trying to think of it off the top of your head and going, the dragon, it's big and it's green, rather than NPCs and characters. Very specifically, it's always good to have preparation for those if there are specific NPCs and definitely the villain. The villain is the main driving force of the plot. So it's really good to have a lot of, if you can maybe build the villain up as you would a character, make him more powerful and give him some extra spells or something that the players don't have access to, or those are the things that you really want to make sure that you've got notes on. Not necessarily every single person in a town. If you've got the time to do it, then for sure. And
time to do it, and you're going to have the well, and you feel that you can juggle that in the time frame when you're playing as well. I mean, there's only so many things that you're going to be able to do at one time when you're running a game. If you can absolutely know where all the information is for each person in each shop, in each place, in each town, as they get to it, absolutely fine. If you can do that on paper, or you can do that digitally in sort of boxes and pages where you can just skip directly to the right path and have the information there available, and you can be inclined to have it all written out, totally do that. Why not? Otherwise, for the rest of us who aren't capable of managing all that, I like to try and have maybe a couple of places that may be open and a couple of names and a couple of things about them, and then just build the rest where and as you feel like it. Run with what you think that character should sound like and how they should talk and behave, and react to the characters. They are going to come back and they are going to ask the same questions again, or something based on what you've said. And if you haven't written it down, you're not going to be able to remember every tiny detail, especially ones that you made up on the spot. Because sometimes they will pick out that one thing. Yeah,
they'll come back to the bar and they'll say, "Where's Steve the barman?" And he'll be like, "Who? Steve? Oh, he's a family emergency. He's had to go. His donkeys fell down a well," or something like this.
Worst case, if you come up against something, just make it up.
Oh yeah,
it's totally fine. Sure. You can do it convincingly. They won't know you've made it up. It doesn't matter if they do know you've made it up. It's totally, as long as it's fun and it makes sense and people are okay with it, it's all right. You're in charge.
Yeah. If you're going to have specific encounters, it is worth having like a fairly detailed, maybe get some graph paper and just sort of sketch yourself a map down. If you've got space and inclination to do an actual tabletop and maybe some terrain that you've made, like sort of Warhammer type terrain or something that you can put down for you, or even Lego. I've seen DMs use Lego to do buildings, and it's great if you've got something like that. Not everyone likes that. Myself, I prefer to do a grid map on graph paper.
Yeah.
Sometimes I'll just put it down for the players and say, okay, this is the room that you're in. There is a thing called fog of war that is prevalent in some strategy games where you can't see everything that's going on the map. You can do that as a DM, but it's a bit harder to do on paper. There is a way to do it, and I'll mention it later on. You can obviously do it just with bits of paper that obscure the map, but there is another way of doing it that I found that is actually quite handy to do.
Intrigued.
I'll tell you about it in a second. But yeah.
So the method that I came up with was to first of all create a master copy of the map. So this is for you as the DM. And then to have a sheet of tracing paper, and this is the copy that you will give to the players. So initially you start off drawing just the first few things that the players can see from the master copy. And then as they explore, you simply copy on the new details. It is a bit easier for a smaller map or a simple map like something like a dungeon crawl or something. If it's a larger map or it's got quite a lot of detail on it, you might want to find the pieces of paper method might be easier, because it will obviously take you a few seconds to copy the new details down each time. But I quite like that method.
Say your encounter is going to happen let's say it's in a modern alleyway. So your players have gone into this alleyway chasing this suspicious looking character, and then suddenly they bump into this guy's street gang and they've been ambushed. If you plonk down on the table a grid map and you've got details like a skip, you've got a fire escape over here, you've got light from a damaged fluorescent bulb over here, and you can actually show them in detail what is going on, it really helps visualize what they want their characters to do. Because you can say stuff like, okay, my character immediately dives behind the skip over here, takes aim with his pistol and shoots out the light, plunging the the alleyway into darkness and things like this. And it really helps rather than saying you are in the east of the room and there are 3 tables. Obviously, the first thing they're going to ask is something like, okay, right, how big is this room? How far away are the tables? Where's the enemy? If you've got a map or something, you can put down, even if it's just things like coins or counters, you can put down to say, okay, right, this 5p is you, Jeff. This penny is you, Sarah. This D4 is the enemy. It doesn't matter what they are. If you haven't got miniatures, it's really good just to be able to have something visual in front of you and go, looking at it, if I go down this way, there's a fence here. Am I able to get out of the alleyway and climb over this fence? You can say, yeah, sure. If you just want to leg it, sure, make me an agility check. Yes, you manage to climb out of the fence and you escape. If you've got it there, it's just handy to be able to look at things. Having an environment where you've got stuff that the players can do with, it makes it so much more interesting than just, I hit him, I do 6 damage. He hits me, he does 10 damage. I heal, I hit him again. He
is dead.
I hate that kind of combat. It's really stale.
Occasionally try to work on a one sort of hit resolution sort of system where you will have some form of combat and then you just explain roughly what happens during the combat and who takes what damage and who's dead and who's still alive. Yeah. Because it gets a little bit too damage.
That is something that it's really important to keep track of as well as a DM is what's going on during combat, because you've got to know how much your creatures, your enemies have got in terms of health and how much your players have got. Bear in mind that your players aren't going to know how much your monster has got in terms of health or armor. They'll figure out the armor at some point. If in D&D as an example, because they'll roll, does a 15 hit? No. Does an 18 hit? Yes. Okay, so it's somewhere between 15 and 18. They'll figure that out quite quickly. But they're not going to know how much health this creature has got. You can give them an idea. After, say, about 3 or 4 rounds of combat, a player might say, okay, what's the monster looking at? You can say, well, it's bleeding a bit from its flank where you stabbed it earlier, and it's not moving as fast, but it still looks powerful. And that gives them a bit of an idea of how damaged the enemy is, rather than having like a hit bar above them like you've got on a video game. By all means, if you want them to know that, you can tell them. I find as a narrative game, it's much more interesting to say, okay, the 2 barbarians that you've been fighting,
one of them looks pretty beaten up with bruises and cuts, whereas the other one is still running around looking fresh as a daisy.
And it's perfectly valid as well. If you're fighting an intelligent enemy like a human or a dwarf or something, if you've got them down to like 20% health, by all means have that enemy or character run away or attempt to surrender. Because unless they're zealous maniacs or something like this, they're not going to just fight to the death if there's no need for them to do so. So if you've got them fighting a group of bandits especially because they're going to be chaotic evil, they're fighting them and you've just killed their captain in one swipe in front of them, then the rest of the band of bandits might just be like, oh, right, okay, guys, I think we might just, we'll be leaving.
On our way now.
See you later. The loot's over there in the chest. See ya. and just scarper. In fact, sometimes that's really good because it makes the players feel powerful. They've been attacked by a massive group of bandits, and the paladin immediately stands up and goes, I challenge you to the captain of the bandits. And he slays him with one, swipe of his broadsword, and the whole bandit camp is just like, no, we're just going to leave. That's great. As a story device, because your paladin now is just going to be feeling like on top of the world. But then later on, you can have him be in a fight and he gets completely mullered by something that he thought he was going to have no problem with. You want to give them highs and lows. You don't want them to necessarily feel like they are able just to swat every single enemy, as soon as they see it.
Take it away and have them put back, have their powers taken away, have them captured with no weapons.
Yeah. So I think one of the things that is quite important, I think, for when you're starting doing DMing and it doesn't matter what the game is or anything, this is just one of the things that you should try and do is building a rapport with the players as you go through the game. So it's stuff like trying to make eye contact with them when you're speaking to them, being animate, describing things with hand gestures, and putting that drama into your narration. Because if you're narrating like, you walk into a room and there is 7 goblins, that's really boring.
And sort of if you are being the DM, play a character, that's all they have to do. But your job is to be every other character and every other thing, and the weather and the atmosphere and the temperature and the story and everything. You have to do all of those things.
It's not to say that every single room you go in, you have to go, oh, the temperature was 32 degrees centigrade.
But, if it's relevant to it, you have to bring that in.
If you go from, say, your adventure has been taking part outdoors, and you say, okay, it's a nice summer day, it's in the 20s, and then you go into this room and you feel this temperature drops several degrees, and that will make them think, the players will go, oh, why is that? Is there something spoopy happening?
There is something happening. Maybe there's not, and you're just doing it to add tension because it may be that kind of a part. Like when you're watching a film and stuff, they're trying to give an idea of what you might have to expect that's going to be happening.
With films, it's all visual. So if you're a director and you're filming something and say the ghostly, spoopy things are happening, probably there'll be a focus on the character's mouth and you'll see the mist of them breathing, or they'll focus on goose flesh and the hair will stand up.
But you can describe that happening. Like some good writing, it describes the body language of the character without necessarily explaining what the character's feeling, because you don't have to. Just imagine that.
Depending on how far you want to go into the actual role-playing, getting into character as well as a DM. So if your players are conducting an interrogation, you could have a tell. So this character that they're talking to could be like, every time he's nervous, he could start to twiddle his fingers, or his throat gets dry and he has to continually keep drinking. Well, what happened was, excuse me, all these sort of things, if they pick up on it, that's great. That's maybe something that is later down the line when you've been DMing for a while, because if you're playing multiple characters, it's easy to get mixed up. But if you've got a sheet with the character names written down, then you can, it's easier to keep track of saying, okay, right, this guy who they were speaking to last session.
Jamaican German scientist is what the accent usually comes at. Is he a vampire? Yes, he is now a vampire. Can we talk a little bit about music? There's not really something that a lot of people maybe would be considering the idea as an introductory, but there are ways of making that happen quite simply.
Soundboards and things are quite good for that. You can get soundboard apps, phones. There's some that are online. I might put a link on here at the end. But I will actually, I was thinking of doing that as a separate episode, the whole immersion. But yeah, sound and music is definitely something that you can use as a tool.
I'll let you go into detail another time then.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's worth mentioning. Yeah, it is something that I want to do as a separate episode. I've got a soundboard on my phone, actually. That it's a silly soundboard. Yeah, that sort of thing, That's a pocket sitcom soundboard. It's a stupid soundboard that I downloaded specifically for...
to make the epic jump roll. You've made it.
Yeah, exactly. If you've got a soundboard and you want to use it as a player, it is worth speaking to the DM and the other players first, because sometimes that can get a bit irritating.
If you've got a close-knit group of people that are old school friends and they know each other very well, they're probably going to be able to get on all right. They might get a couple of niggly things that annoy them, but they might not be people that actually know each other very well. You might not know them very well. And sometimes personalities clash a little bit.
Conflict resolution, trying to keep things so that the game is fun for everyone, that's probably the hardest part of being a DM.
As long as you set the things out at the beginning, what are the right things and what are the wrong things?
Exactly.
From your perspective, what kind of things would you say would be like a possible house rule for a role play that people might not think of?
What, off the top of my head now?
Yeah.
If you're playing with players that you're unfamiliar with, or or you've just started to DM, is to discuss with the players how they want to deal with PvP, player versus player. If you've got a rogue in the group, that's sort of the stereotypical thing, is the rogue will be like trying to steal everybody's stuff. Well, no, because you're a party. You've probably known each other for a long time. I mean, even if you're working as strangers, to do with common sense of the character as well. This guy knows he's working with people who are at least the same sort of skill level as himself. So he probably wouldn't steal from them and put himself at risk. But some people seem to think it's a new player thing, I think, when you're playing like a rogue or a cleric who doesn't have any sort of leniency. He's sort of, you must believe in this god, and if you don't believe in the tenets of my religion, then I will smite you. Come on, you've got to learn to get on with the people in your group. If you want to play a semi-realistic game, it is at least worth saying to them, look, guys, I appreciate some of the time.
Level of realism we would like to try and stick to as a group.
This is a thing as well with newer players, is that the number one go-to for a problem solve is whack
it with a stick.
Yeah, which is fine, but sometimes you want to think that would probably be as a last resort, if everything else wasn't working.
So if I can really try and set up like an introductory sort of get to know the controls kind of scenario.
The session 0,
their character and their specific skill set can be used and to try and get them to think outside the box.
Yeah.
I was lucky enough to have made a bit of a start with beta test for a large franchise name.
To me the other day.
Yeah. Some of the rule system is a little bit odd in that you can pool stuff ready to spend later on. But when you look at it, that allows you to make slightly more ridiculous things happen. As I was talking about, like the supreme long shot, you can sort of stack things all together and then pull bonuses, have other players aid you to increase your chances of being successful in something that otherwise would have sounded fairly impossible. But sometimes that's worth sort of explaining to the characters how they can use things together to better give the best results and not just try to whack everything with a stick. Because that's more exciting. And, the fact that you're trying to explain, I'm building a story, try and think of interesting ways that you think it might be to solve a problem, which they're going to do anyway. That one of the best sort of joys of role-playing, when your characters come up with an amazing way of solving a problem you had considered first.
Yeah.
And then the character says, but my character was raised specifically as a street thief, and specifically in his backstory, he is a master climber. And this is a stone wall, so presuming that, it's an old one. You just told me it's hundreds of years old. So presumably he could quite easily just scale the wall then. Yeah, he probably could. Which means he could probably sneak in. Yeah, he probably would actually, wouldn't he? Yeah. I'm going to do that then. I've just let everyone in. The impenetrable fortress, and I've just walked in the front door. Oh, great, thanks. But equally, amazing.
The original problem or task or whatever it is, you would set the difficulty. So you would say, okay, so if it was a normal person, you'd set the difficulty for climbing this wall. Maybe it'd set it to 30, but then you'd go, yeah, you're a master climber. Your bonuses are probably going to get you to about 15 anyway. Plus you've got the experience. And then they just roll it and, okay. I mean, sure, it was a high difficulty. You've made the roll. I tend to err on the side of DMing that says that a 20 is not an automatic pass. It's definitely, in terms of D&D, obviously, this is. If it's an attack, obviously, it's a critical. But if it's a skill check, I don't go on the... Because there are some DMs who just say, a 20 is a pass.
Yeah.
Your 10 strength level 1 human is not going to be...
I'm going to attempt to jump the chasm.
You're not
going to be able to do that. I rolled a 20, so I flew.
Yeah. So if it was for a jump or something, you could say you run and you get to the edge and you leap, and it looks as though you're going to make it, but then you drop. But fortunately, there is like a tree root sticking out a couple of feet from the edge of the precipice, and you latch onto it. As long as you can make the next strength check, you can up from that route.
Yeah.
You could do something like that.
No, that's not going to happen, or yes, that possibly could happen.
Yeah. as you mentioned there, the golden phrase is a DM. Yes, and can I do this? Yes, and you want to try where possible to make things. If you set them a question or whatever, you want to make it an open-ended question.
Which again, I think is another thing for DMs starting to consider. That sometimes you just need to keep the story moving, and sometimes the players will completely fixate on how they're going to open the door, and it's just a door. Just do the thing.
A good trick for this as a DM is to invest. You can do it on your phone as well with stopwatch on the phone. But I've got a sand timer, and it's so much fun bringing out a sand timer. It doesn't matter what it is, because you can use it as just get a move on. They're there fanning around with the door. You can be like, just gonna get this here. And they go, what's that for? You don't need to tell them anything. I'm just keeping an eye.
I like that.
A sand timer or a timer or something. Even again, if you've got music is great for that, because you can sort of have a really quiet crescendo building up. I've got this great track. Music, G ambient. Yeah, this is it. So I'm not sure whether you'll be able to. Can you hear that over the?
Yeah.
I'll turn it down, because you can just have this going in the background, and they'll be like, what's going on? The temperature drops in the room. What? The temperature's dropped. You've all got goosebumps. Oh my god, what's going on? There's a scratching noise down the corridor. What? It's getting close. Oh, open the door, open the door, open the door. And they will just start to freak out. And I love stuff like that, where you can just, something's happening and you don't give them all the details. Part of the beauty of the human brain is it will fill in gaps for things. So if you give them a slight bit of detail, like even if it's just something like, as you enter the room, roll perception for me. Okay, right, roll perception. Doesn't matter what they roll. This is the beauty again. Doesn't matter what they roll. They automatically fail. Okay, I've got a 20. In your peripheral vision, something black flits past. It doesn't make a sound. And they can search that whole place for something, and it's not necessarily anything there.
Well, this is the whole point.
Especially if you are playing a horror game, you have stuff like that happening, evoking a feeling of paranoia or being chased or something. You know, you want the players to have whatever feeling you want them to have. Again, if it's something like they do something right and you want to give them a feeling of accomplishment, there are several ways that you can go about it. Obviously, there's XP and gold and stuff, but you can also have like NPCs going, you saved me from that horrible death knight. I can't begin to thank you enough. Listen, if you're ever in our town, just drop by. My dad's the baker in the town, okay, and we will feed you. We will put you up for the night. You know, stuff like that. And then if this happens in a campaign or something, you can have tales of their exploits going from town to town. Are you the guys that saved Jacob from the Death Knight? Oh, we heard about you guys. And just build on what's happening. You want to try and make the world feel alive.
Didn't you also kill all those hobos and chop their fingers off? Yeah, we heard about that too.
Coming up with things on the fly, that as regards things like loot, that's often a thing. You know, the players have had an encounter and they've bandits or something, and immediately the rogue will say, I want to loot the bodies. Oftentimes it's like, okay, right, so what level were these bandits? What level are you guys? If you want to cut down on the time for those sort of things, again, there are tables and apps that are available where you can just say, okay, the guys just fought 6 bandits and they are level 3. And then it will just auto-generate a couple of broadswords and 6 gold. Or you can look in the back of the monster manual or something and just look up, okay, a bandit tends to carry this, okay, he's got some leather armor on, blah, 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 and just do it that way. Depending on how sort of realistic you want to do, if you've been fighting enemies in leather armor, you could say to the players, okay, they've got leather armor, but it's ruined. Yeah. You've stabbed them enough times that the armor is not holding together. Or
you try to remove the leather armor, and you're left with a few strips of leather.
Yeah. If you don't go on to the whole realism thing, you've got like a halfling kills a Goliath, and the Goliath has leather armor, and a halfling goes, I'll have that leather armor. You think to yourself, I think it might be a bit big for you. If you want to go into that, then you can always say,
you slide your body into the armor and pull it up over your shoulders. You realise this helmet's definitely too big.
Yeah. You can always say to the player, okay, you've got the armor, but it doesn't fit at the moment. You can take it to the nearest town and have it re-altered for a couple of gold, maybe. Try and be sensible with it. I got an app to help me with initiative order. This is especially if you've got a lot of players and or a lot of enemies. So say if they just blunder into a bandit encampment and there are like 10, 20 bandits.
Yeah.
And you sort
Who gets to move?
If it's something like that, you could potentially just do a sort of a mass roll for all of the bandits. All of the bandits roll, or do them 5 at a time, let's say. So say 5 bandits get 16 initiative, the next 5 bandits get 12 initiative, or however you want to do it, because that will help you save time on things. You might want to do a specific roll for, say, the bandit captain or something like that, but if you've got a lot of generic mooks, goblins or giant rats or something like that, sometimes it's just worth doing one dice roll and saying, okay, all of the rats move 3rd in the initiative order. Again, like there are apps just to put things in and say, okay, they're going next, and just keeping track of hit points and who's done what action, if someone's doing like a concentration spell, all of this sort of thing you've got to keep track of. That's one of the things where it can be quite confusing for a new DM. I mean, even for more experienced DMs, or if you're doing a game that is quite sort of crunch heavy, as it were, that's got a lot of different things going on. D&D is actually relatively forgiving, I think. It's only when you go into sort of the later levels of high level magic.
Whereas there are a lot of systems out there that are quite crunchy.
Yeah.
So I probably try to avoid anything that's going to be too confusing, especially if you've got a newish DM and then newish players who haven't played the game before, who aren't very used to playing that type of game. Try and keep it nice and simple and easy so that you can move it along and it'd be fun.
If you want to streamline some things, sometimes you can sort of streamline things if you think it's going to make the game flow a bit easier. Alternatively,
I'm always a fan of changing the rules.
Yeah, I mean, again, alternatively, there are game systems that are very light on the rules, like Dread and 10 Candles, which I mentioned in the last episode. Did you ever play Everybody is John?
I haven't played it. You've told me lots about it.
Everybody is John is... I'll definitely do a link to the rules, but it's a game that I heard of from somebody quite a while ago. John is the protagonist of the story, and he has multiple personality disorder, and so all the players take turns in being John. They've got a goal for John, and that's how you figure out who actually wins the game, when the player manages to get John to do whatever the goal is. When John falls asleep or if he's knocked unconscious, then the next player, when John wakes up again, the next player has a turn to do things. And it's a really interesting game.
Read it, play it.
Yeah, exactly. Anything that strikes your fancy. If you see a game system, there's loads on Drive-Thru RPG if you have a look on there, or have a look through YouTube.
There are plenty if you search for just simple one-page RPGs where the rules are incredibly simple and fit on one page. In a similar way, I want to do a bit of a hack on one that I saw recently in the same sort of vein called Crash Pandas, which is an American thing, so I didn't really get the reference. I had to explain to me. Raccoons in America are called trash pandas.
Yes.
Because they look a bit like pandas and they're right. So Crash Pandas, it's a bunch of raccoons who all do street racing. So each person plays a raccoon and they decide what action they are going to do secretly, and then they all unveil it as part of the round. And each of them will be doing something in the car.
Yeah.
So you then get to find out, based on the add up of who has got the majority of what action the car itself does, whether it's to go faster or to slow down or to start steering left. It was left, again, because it's a one page, it's left very, very simple. I want at some point maybe to have a hack version with maybe actual race courses, maybe actual returning competitor drivers. I think that could be good fun.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting sometimes, maybe if you're a more experienced DM who've had some experience of different game systems, you can co-opt some of these different methods of doing things into a game. I remember there was one session of Dark Heresy I was playing. I used some random figures that I had, some ship figures, and I used the rule sets from the X-Wing tabletop game. I played that with you, didn't I, one time?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I used that as a ship battle in Dark Heresy, and I had them do a boarding action onto an enemy ship, and that was quite interesting. Just having that as a sort of if it's in the campaign, it helps to sort of break up. It's interesting just to have a different flow of things. You might want to cut down on the rules for that because obviously the players aren't used to playing it, and I really simplified the rules.
Video games, you'll suddenly have like that weird little sort of like mini game that's thrown in random, or suddenly you'll be doing something very different.
A segue off into doing.
Yeah, I mean, literally almost exactly that vein. Assassin's Creed did a part, I think it might have been in Rogue. That's not one of the ones I've played, where they do literally that. It then becomes a bit of a ship session and a bit of ship battle, but it was only a very small part of the game.
Yeah.
They just steal a little bit and put it in. But again, it was mostly just to break it up a little bit, to do something a bit different and be a bit fun.
Again, by all means, if you've got an idea for doing something that is it's not in the actual rule book, as long as you've got a way of keeping it balanced and you can explain it to your players, then by all means, just shove it in. They're going to enjoy it, whatever it is.
Don't be trying to get your players around the tavern to suddenly start a game of Monopoly.
Yeah. Could have these things in game as well. If you're in a tavern, you could have a game of Texas Hold'em going on in the tavern, and you could have like a sort of a mini sub game of a gambling game.
Something that's appropriate to the genre that you're playing, but not necessarily if you're having something that's a bit silly and a bit fun.
Yeah.
Ran a couple of pub games in a session that I'd hashed together myself along some version of a dice game. And I think it was something involving throwing knives. I made up the rules.
If it's a skill game as well, you can give the character bonuses or negatives based on their character as well. You can figure out some sort of way of doing that within the game. So say if you've got like darts or something like that, if you've got enough room in your house and you've actually got a dartboard, you can say, okay, right, so your player's a bit better at dexterity, so you can actually take a step closer to the board and put these things in.
You're going to play a dice game. However, your particular character is particularly good at sleight of hand. If you want to be deciding a sleight of hand roll, we'll see whether or not you succeed. And if you do, I'm going to let you roll an extra dice.
Or you can add one, or whatever the roll is.
Players have their own in-game or even out-of-game slight competition with each other sometimes. There might have been...
and it's fine to have competition within the game, as long as everybody realises at the end of the day it is collaborative game. You want to try and get everybody involved. Oh, that was one of the things I wanted to bring up as well, is when you are coming up with the actual plot line or the encounters that you might want them to come across during the game, it's worth bearing in mind what the players' characters and their personality themselves, as in real life, what their character and their personality is like. So what they want to be involved in. So if you've got a rogue in the party, you want to have some sneaky parts. Or some traps that he's going to be able to detect and disarm. If you've got a bard in the party, there might be some parts where you want to sort of distract, to try and talk his way out of something. You want to try and get everybody...
a poem to read out aloud.
Entertain. Exactly. So as long as, at the end of the day, as long as everybody is having fun, as well as yourself...
Not left on the sidelines.
Myself as a player, if someone's willing to host a game for me, 9 times out of 10, I'm not going to turn that down. I'm going to say, yes, please get me involved. It's nice to know that someone has taken that effort to come up with a storyline and have you take part in it.
if I can build in the character's backstory into the plot itself, so that either becomes an integral part of the plot, or
something that
we're going to learn new things about the character that will connect it to the plot.
The best backstories I find is, I'm a DM who will read maybe a page or two of backstory, but if it's longer than that, I will be like, that's too much.
Yeah, no, it doesn't.
You want an incomplete backstory, and the beauty of an incomplete backstory is you can come up with things that link into your story or to the other players, or just something that happens whilst you're in game, rather than having, okay, this is my family tree, this is what happened when I was 7.
Yes. When he was 22, he set sail and arrived here and took a job as a small fisherman.
Yes.
He did travelling for a few years. Yeah. Is what he did.
He worked on boats. Yeah, you don't even need to say he was a fisherman.
On the shores. He doesn't know how old he is. He's about 25, and there's a dark history that he can't remember.
And he has this strange scar along his back that looks as though he's been whipped.
Yeah.
Okay.
When did that happen? We don't know.
Is he a criminal, or was he? It leads to all sorts. If you've got something quite vague, you can build on it rather than having the player saying, this is everything that's happened to him since he was born.
You need to have things that ask questions rather than answer all the questions.
Yeah. Plus, I'm too lazy. If a player comes to me with like a 4-page backstory, I'll just be like, just sum it up for me. Just, I quite like, can you sum up your character in 3 sentences?
That's good.
And then that's really good as well if you've got a player who is stuck. If you'd run them session 0 and they're just like, I can't think of, just say, okay, right, 3 sentences, go. He was born to a noble family. His father was a close advisor to the king, but somebody stitched him up and they had to go into exile.
Done.
So you've got a wealth of things that you can say from that. Coming from a noble family, does he have that snooty outlook of, he's superior to other people? Or now that he's in exile, does he actually realize that, oh wow, coming out of a life of privilege, it's all sorts. You can build on those sort of details that you've come up with. So I think that's it for this episode. Next episode, I will be delving into physical things that you can give to the players during a game, doing maps, prop making and building. And thank you very much for joining me, Dan.
Very welcome. Thank you very much indeed.
Okay, so see you next time.